Martha had been running from something all her life, but she never expected to find herself stumbling through the golden wheat fields of Thomas McCready's ranch, with her white dress torn and stained with blood. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Montana landscape as she collapsed near his fence line, gasping for breath and clutching her side where the thorns had caught her during her desperate flight. Through the brambles, Thomas was checking his cattle when he saw her there kneeling, in the dirt like a broken angel, her wedding veil tangled around her shoulders and tears streaming down her face. He had lived alone on this land for 15 years since his wife Mary passed, and he thought he had seen everything that heartbreak could offer, but this young woman's anguish touched something deep in his weathered soul. She looked up at him with eyes full of terror and whispered the words that would change both their lives forever. "Please, I don't want to marry him." Thomas froze as he took in the sight before him, understanding immediately what had happened here was a bride who had found the courage to run on what should have been the happiest day of her life. He knelt down beside her, careful not to startle her further, and spoke in the gentle voice he once used with spooked horses. "You're safe now, miss. Nobody's going to make you do anything you don't want to do." Martha had grown up in the shadow of her father's expectations, and her betrothal to William Hartwell had been arranged before she could even understand what marriage truly meant. William was a successful businessman from back east with money and connections, but Martha had seen the coldness in his eyes and felt the bruising grip of his hands during their brief courtship. On their wedding morning, as she stood in her childhood bedroom surrounded by white lace and orange blossoms, she finally found the strength to listen to the voice inside her heart that had been screaming for months. She had climbed out her bedroom window, still wearing her wedding dress, and run through the countryside until her legs gave out, and she found herself on this stranger's land. Thomas helped her to her feet and led her slowly toward his modest farmhouse where his old dog Rex greeted them with gentle curiosity. "Let's get you cleaned up," he said as he opened the door to reveal a simple but comfortable home filled with the kind of warmth that comes from years of quiet contentment. The kitchen smelled of coffee and fresh bread, and Martha noticed how everything was neat and orderly in a way that spoke of a man who had learned to care for himself with dignity. Thomas poured her a cup of coffee and set out some of Mary's old clothes that he had kept in a cedar chest all these years, telling himself someday he might need them for something important. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said, as he tended to the scratches on her arms with the gentle efficiency of someone who had doctored many wounded creatures over the years. But Martha found herself wanting to talk to this kind stranger, who asked nothing of her except to let him help. She told him about her father's gambling debts and how William had offered to pay them in exchange for her hand in marriage. She spoke of the loneliness she felt even when surrounded by people, and the growing fear that she would disappear entirely into the life someone else had chosen for her. Thomas listened without judgment, his weathered hands steady as he bandaged her cuts and his blue eyes full of understanding. "I married my Mary when I was 22, he said quietly, "but it was different then because we chose each other, and even when times were hard we knew we were walking the same path together." He told her about the years he and Mary had tried to have children and how they had learned to find joy in small things like morning coffee shared in comfortable silence and evenings spent reading by the fire. "After she passed, I thought about leaving this place," he continued, "but I realized that all our happiness was still here in every corner of this house and every acre of this land." Martha felt something shift inside her as she listened to this man speak about love with such gentle reverence. For the first time in her life, she was hearing what marriage could be when it was built on respect and genuine affection rather than obligation and financial arrangement. "What am I going to do?" she asked him. "I can't go back, but I don't know how to go forward." Thomas was quiet for a long moment as he considered her question with the same careful thought he gave to all important decisions. "You could stay here for a while," he said finally, "just until you figure things out, and there's no strings attached to that offer." He showed her to Mary's sewing room, which had a comfortable bed and windows that looked out over the rolling pastures where his horses grazed peacefully. Mary always said this room had good light for thinking, he told her. "Maybe it will help you see your way clear." That first night, Martha lay awake listening to the sounds of the countryside and feeling safer than she had in months. Over the following days, she helped Thomas with small tasks around the ranch discovering that she had a natural way with the animals and a talent for fixing things that were broken. Thomas never pressured her to talk about her past or make decisions about her future, but simply included her in the rhythm of his daily life. They worked together in the garden that Mary had planted years ago, bringing it back to life with careful attention and patient nurturing. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, sharing stories about their childhoods and their dreams while the sun set over the mountains in the distance. Martha learned that Thomas had been a teacher before he became a rancher, and that he still read voraciously, especially books about history and philosophy. He learned that she had always wanted to study literature, but her father considered education unnecessary for women who were destined for marriage. "It's never too late to learn," Thomas told her one evening as he brought out a box of Mary's favorite books. Mary was always reading something new, and she used to say that a good book was like having a conversation with the wisest person you'd never met. 3 weeks passed in this gentle routine, and Martha began to understand what it felt like to wake up each morning without fear. She had written to her sister explaining where she was and asking her to tell their parents that she was safe but needed time to think. The reply came back through Thomas's neighbor who collected mail in town, and it brought news that made Martha's hands tremble as she read. Her father was threatening to have her declared mentally incompetent if she didn't return immediately, and William was talking about hiring men to bring her back by force. Thomas found her crying in Mary's garden that afternoon and sat down beside her on the old wooden bench. "They're going to make me go back," she whispered, "and this time they won't let me run." Thomas was quiet for a long time, watching the horses move across the pasture, with the grace of creatures who had never known captivity. "There might be another way," he said carefully, "but it would require a kind of trust that most folks find difficult." He turned to look at her with those steady blue eyes that had become her anchor in the storm of her life. "If you were married to someone else, they couldn't force you to marry William," he said, "and a woman has more legal standing as a wife than as a runaway daughter." Martha felt her heart begin to race as she understood what he was suggesting. "You mean," she began, but couldn't finish the sentence. "I mean a marriage of convenience," Thomas said gently. "Nothing more than papers that would give you legal protection and time to build a life of your own choosing," he explained, "that she could stay on the ranch as long as she needed and that he would help her pursue her education or whatever path she chose." "But what would you get out of such an arrangement?" Martha asked, unable to believe that anyone would be so generous, without expecting something in return. Thomas smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him since the day they met. "I'd get the pleasure of watching someone discover who they really are when they're free to choose," he said, "and that's worth more than you might think." They were married the following week in a simple ceremony at the small church in town, with only the preacher's wife and the town doctor as witnesses. Martha wore a simple blue dress that had belonged to Mary and carried wildflowers from the garden they had restored together as they exchanged vows. Thomas looked into her eyes and spoke words that came from genuine caring, rather than romantic passion. "I promise to respect your choices and protect your freedom for as long as you need me to," he said. "I promise to bring honor to your kindness and to use the gift you're giving me to become someone worthy of it." Martha replied. The years that followed were unlike anything either of them had expected. Martha threw herself into learning with the hunger of someone who had been denied intellectual nourishment for too long. Thomas arranged for her to take correspondence courses, and later to attend the teachers' college in the state capital where she excelled in literature and writing. She returned to the ranch each summer to help with the harvest and to continue the quiet friendship that had grown between them. As Martha grew into the confident, educated woman she had always been meant to be, Thomas found himself looking forward to her letters and visits with an anticipation that surprised him. He had thought his heart was too scarred by loss to love again, but Martha's transformation from frightened bride to accomplished teacher filled him with a pride and affection that felt entirely natural. On her 25th birthday, Martha came home from college with news that would test the bonds they had forged. She had been offered a position teaching at a prestigious school,